Hey guys, what's going on? This is Michael here. So this is not the video that I thought I was making for you guys. This is a lesson on what not to do. So I've got my mold here, and you notice the rim of clay around the outside? Yeah, don't do that. So this was the other one that I have plans on making. So one of them's 4 stacks high, the other's 3 stacks high. So I figure I'll show you what I did, because there's some parts of these techniques that are good, but there's a good bit of it that you don't want to do. So what I did was I filled up my Lego brick mold with grains of rice, and then I poured those off into this cup, and I am just going to mark the outside of the cup with black Sharpie. So you can see me going around the cup right here with the marker just to draw my line, and that's pretty much it. So once you do that, you're done with the rice, and you can just dump it back into whatever bag you're storing it in. So you can see off to the side there, that big yellow bucket. Well, that is my silicone. The silicone that I'm using is Mold Max. It's the 14NV is the product name. And the nice thing about this silicone is it actually self-levels, so I don't have to worry about leveling it. And that blue bottle there, well, that's the activator. So you mix the activator into the silicone to cause the silicone to actually get hard, because otherwise it just simply will stay liquidy. I've never seen it dry without that activator. So you do it all by weight. So here's my scale. So now, you guys who've seen some of my recent videos, you know that I broke my wrist. So I'm trying desperately to get this bucket lid off with one wrist that is still a bum wrist. And I should be wearing, I have a different brace that stabilizes it, but when I'm home, I'm trying to get a break from that brace a little bit, so I'm just wearing an ace bandage, and it's not quite enough, but we were successful. I did get the lid off, even though this is going to be a disaster video, and I probably would have been better if I had just left that lid on. So give your silicone a stir, and I will tell you that this big bucket of silicone probably isn't what I'm going to get in the future. It is a little cheaper when you buy it in the big bucket versus buying the little container, but generally speaking, the molds that I make are pretty small, and the big bucket just is a pain in the butt to try and manage it. So I mean, it's up to you. If you want to save some money, you can by getting the large bucket like this, but I think for my money, I would rather go ease of use. Not to mention the fact that I don't know if this stuff goes bad, like spoils or something like that. I don't think it does, but I'm gonna have this bucket for a while before I use it up. So if it does go bad, I run that risk. So any savings you have in terms of cost, you might lose just in the simple fact that the stuff spoils. So once you give it a good stir, and you want to make sure and get all the way down to the bottom and scrape that stuff up to the top. Just scrape off your paint stick back into the bucket, and then we're going to pour this out into our little solo cup. So we have our line, which is already drawn on the plastic cup, and we're just going to pour it to the line or slightly below the line. The reason why I say slightly below is when you add the activator to this, you will raise it up a little bit, so you don't necessarily need to fill it all the way to the line. That activator is going to make up the difference. So I'm just pouring it in, and one of the things that I did beforehand is I threw that empty plastic cup on the scale and I zeroed it out. And by zeroing it out, you're not dealing with the weight of the plastic cup, which isn't a lot, but does make a difference when you're trying to be really accurate. So these plastic cups are usually about 10 grams, and I think this whole thing's gonna probably weigh like 200 and something grams. We'll see here in a minute. But you can see 10 grams is still on my scale, so I'll go ahead and zero that in a second. Oh, I'm sorry, it's negative 10 grams. I already did zero it. So snap the lid back on, and then we will weigh out this silicone in a sec here. So by weighing it, we can get really accurate, and it's a 10-to-1 ratio. So 10 parts of the silicone to 1 part of the activator. So simple math, really. You can just take the silicone, whatever it weighs out to be, divide it by 10, and that's how much of the activator that you have to put in. Now my scale doesn't do like point something something of a gram, it just does grams, so I'm a little limited with what I'm actually able to measure. So we are 247 divided by 10, so it's 24.7. So we're going to add about 25 grams of the activator in, and the small bottles of the activator are really easy to pour, but the big bottles are definitely not. So we are going to spray the mold release, and then we're going to we're going to mix up our silicone, spray the mold release, and then we are going to pour the silicone in. So I go ahead and I zero out the scale, and I'm going to grab myself a clean solo cup from the back of my workbench there, and I'm just going to pour a little bit of this activator into the cup so that then I can use the cup to pour it. It just made life a lot easier when I started doing it this way. So we need to do 25 grams, so we'll just pour a little bit in right on the top of the silicone, and we're going to mix this all through for about 5 minutes. That's how long it really takes to do this. So I'm just watching the measurement on the scale there, and then I'll pour the rest of this back off into the container. So I stopped it here at 24, which is just fine. You know, that little 0.7 of a gram is not going to make a difference. But like I said, that wasn't the problem. You'll see what the problem was later in this video. So, learn from my mistake, you know. For the next mold and for previous molds that I've made, I glued the Lego bricks down. And I saw somebody else had done this trick with using clay to hold it in place, and what happened for me is the silicone literally seeped underneath of the Lego bricks and raised them up. So yeah, it was a disaster. So I'm just speeding up the video here because this is just basically me stirring up the silicone. I'm just stirring top to bottom and trying to get it really well mixed through so that that activator is evenly distributed through the whole thing. And you do that for 5 minutes. And then once you're done, just go ahead and scrape off your little stir. I got this one off of Amazon, and it's a piece of stainless steel with 2 flattened ends. One of them has a square tip and the other has a slightly rounded tip to it, and it is the best stirrer that I have ever had. I know it's a silly thing to spend money on, but for these kinds of projects, it's awesome. So I am going to spray down these molds with the mold release. So once I spray them, I then just take a brush and I'm going to brush out that spray on mold release. And then I am going to also go back in with a liquid mold release back over the top of this, just because these molds are very deep, and I wanted to make sure that the silicone wouldn't get so super stuck on these pieces that I'm trying to mold that I couldn't get them back out of the mold that I had made. So we did our spray, we did our brush. I just did another spray there, and then there's my liquid mold release. So I'll just pour a little bit of that off into this little cup, and then I'm going to brush that on over top of the pieces that I'm trying to cast. Now these are exactly 2 inches tall in this particular mold, and these are going to be corner pieces, so like where 2 walls would meet, these will fill the gap in the corner so that it looks nice when you actually put it all together. But the pieces that these are made from are like 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch blocks, and I have to cast 4 of those blocks to make one of these columns. And the molds that I'm doing only usually give me like 4 in a mold and a lot of waste. So for me, it made a lot of sense to make a mold that I can cast an entire corner in one piece. So 5 minutes on the timer, and we'll cap up this mold release agent after I pour back the leftover. And we're just going to let this this mold release agent set up and dry. So I'm just making sure that I don't have any pooling spots, which I look pretty good on. And that's pretty much it for how to do the mold release. So, like I was saying, with this mold, it is specifically for putting these little wedges in the corners of my dungeon tiles. So I'll show you guys kind of what that looks like here. Let me grab a couple of my dungeon wall pieces just so that I can lay them out on the table. So it basically is a filler. Just to make it look a little better, when you piece it out, so we've got, like, here I've got a corner and I've got a straight wall, and you see how there's that gap that runs right in the middle. That's what these pieces will fill. They'll stack up and they'll just make that joint look like it flows all the way around like construction should. So I think it's kind of a a neat little way to dress up those places that aren't going to look quite perfect. So these are some of the other pieces I've been working on. This is a cave tile. So that one's actually a straight, and here I've got a different design for a straight cave tile. Now these aren't painted up or anything, they just have a base coat of like a cardboard brown. There's a corner tile, and these all have been filled using this really cool trick with super glue and baking soda to get rid of the joint lines in between the pieces. I'll show you one of the pieces that isn't. You can see how these all look like individual blocks. They have really obvious joints. So that will all get filled with this super glue trick to make it nice and smooth and look like rock. And this is actually one that's in progress. So I've started filling the super glue in here on the front side of it, or the inside of it, but on the back it's still those joints. So it'll definitely dress things up a little bit and give us that really finished look to these cave tiles. So the cave tiles, they're the first additional thing that I'm doing. I'm trying to get done the regular dungeon tiles, but then I'll do the cave tiles along with it. But it's kind of like a little bit at a time. I've got plans for a lot more. So I'm just getting set up now with the vibrating station. This usually lives in the corner of my workbench, but I'm moving it into the center for you, just so that you can see a little better. So you can see I had to wedge a putty knife under the corner. That's just because the workbench is perfectly level, but it has a slight bow in the middle of the metal top. So the putty knife will take care of fixing that little bit of an angle adjustment that we need to do. So I'm going to pour this, and then I'll vibrate the mold just to get all of the air bubbles out of the silicone. This stuff flows pretty well. So I don't really need to worry about the detail being lost, but if the bubbles don't get out of it, it could make the silicone weaker, which would mean that as I go to use the mold, it would have a greater chance of ripping. So we're almost ready. We're just waiting last couple of seconds for that mold release to actually finish drying. So we're good to go now, and getting closer and closer to our disaster tipping point, which you'll see here at the end of this video. So I'm clamping the mold down, and then when you pour your silicone, you want to pour it kind of from up high. So the manufacturer says pour it from the lowest spot. My table is so level that I've always found that if I just pour it from the middle, I'm good. But you can see how I'm streaming this from a very high distance, and I'm letting it get into this really teeny tiny stream, and that is so that the bubbles that are inside that cup from stirring it have a chance to pop and release before you pour them into the mold. Just take your time when you're doing this pour. You do not have to race, but you can see I just turned on the vibrating table so that as I pour this, it has a chance to shake some of those bubbles up to the surface. So I'm just going to keep on going, and this pour will do in one pour of the silicone, and it will completely cover those 2-inch long pieces. Now, spoiler alert, I have a video that I'll be doing shortly with the actual mold that I finally did get to cast off of these pieces. But this, of course, I preference the beginning of the video with it. This mold is ruined in the drying process, and you'll see it here at the end of the video. So don't do the clay around the base of it to hold that in place. It is not good enough, and it is asking for disaster. So we're almost over top of the pieces, and I'm just continuing to pour the silicone in, and we're going to go right up to the very top edge of these Lego bricks. I'm giving myself about a ½ inch over top of the pieces that we're making the mold of. So that essentially means that what you see on the top of this becomes the bottom of our mold. So the bottom of our mold becomes a ½ inch thick. Wouldn't have to be. You could make it thinner, but I usually do my molds with about a ½ inch all the way around them, and it seems to work pretty well for me. So I'm just adjusting the putty knife there just to adjust the level on this. Like I said, my vibrating table usually lives in the corner, and I don't have to do that when it's over in the corner because it's perfectly level there, but there is that slight bow, that slight dip in the middle. Now you can see how little silicone that I have left. That is because of the rice grain trick that we used to measure this out, and that really helps keep the waste down. So we're going to set our timer for 45 minutes, and the video is going to cut out here in just a second. And when you come back, you'll get to see my disaster in all of its stupendous glory. So it's basically just vibrating, letting the bubbles rise out of this mold, and waiting for the disaster. Alright, so we are back, and you can see the mess that is sitting on my table. So I had to let it dry before I could pull it out of there, but basically what happened, you can see how the mold lifted. You can see the imprint of the Lego blocks where they rose up, and the mold basically didn't stay down on the board, lifted up, rotated, allowed the silicone to pour out, poured all over the table, and then that's all I got of this real thin coating over those pieces. And you think, well, you've still got the impression, why don't you pour it and use it? Well, there were little holes all over it, so it wasn't like I could pour it and use it. You can see right there how it just totally didn't work. It's very, very disappointing to ruin a mold when you worked, an hour and then had to let it cure for 4 hours before you could even clean up your mess. So it's trash. There's nothing I can do with that. Totally throwing this away and gonna have to start over, unfortunately, but that is just the way it goes sometimes. You know what they say, shit happens. This is a great video for what not to do. But I promise you that I'm going to re-glue these up and put them back down to a board and do this up correctly. Remember, if you like our video, give us a thumbs up and subscribe so you can see more great videos like this.